Rancher lived alone for years, until the pregnant Bigfoot stopped coming to visit. Before we begin, take a moment to comment the name of your city. Where are you watching from tonight? And when the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. It was the summer of 1987 in the quiet woods of Oregon. Benjamin Clark had lived alone for years until the night he saw her. A towering figure at the edge of the trees, eyes glimmering like wet amber under the porch light. She wasn't just any creature, she was pregnant. Every few nights she returned. He left food on a stump. She always took it, and once left gifts in return. But one night she came closer than ever, fear in her eyes, and when she vanished, the forest fell silent. Benjamin didn't know it yet. The silence was only the beginning. Before we begin, take a moment to comment the name of your city. Where are you watching from tonight? And when the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. It was the summer of 1987 in the quiet wilderness of Oregon. The sun had long fallen behind the ridge, leaving only the hum of crickets and the breath of fog curling through the pines. Benjamin Clark, 62, sat on his porch, the same spot he'd sat every night for 20 years. Once a rancher, now a ghost among trees, he lived with nothing but silence and the echo of a life that had ended long ago. Then, as the night deepened, something stirred. At the edge of the tree line, a massive figure stood still, tall, broad, and half hidden by the mist. Benjamin froze, lantern trembling in his hand. When the light caught its face, his heart stopped. It wasn't a man. It wasn't a bear. It was something in between, covered in dark fur with eyes that gleamed gold in the dusk. But what struck him most wasn't its size. It was its stillness. The creature didn't move, didn't threaten it, simply looked at him. And then he saw it, the round curve of its belly. She was pregnant. For a moment the world seemed to pause, just an old man and a mother-to-be staring through a curtain of fog. Something in her eyes, soft, tired, ancient, tore open a memory he'd buried deep. His wife, the night she died, their unborn child lost with her. Benjamin's breath caught. The fear inside him melted into something else, compassion. And in that fragile silence, two lonely souls in the wild seemed to understand each other. Part 1. The Woman in the Shadows. The night after he first saw her, Benjamin Clark couldn't sleep. The image of that tall, silent creature lingered behind his eyes, the curve of her belly, the calm weight of her stare. He told himself it was madness, that maybe his old mind was slipping into fantasy. But when dawn came and the forest shimmered under the thin light of morning, he walked to the edge of the clearing and stared into the trees. Something deep in his chest, a feeling he hadn't known in years, whispered that she was still out there. That evening, as the sun melted into amber light, he stood on his porch again. The wind brushed through the pines, carrying the scent of damp moss and earth. For hours nothing stirred. Then, just before darkness swallowed the woods, he saw her. She was standing where she had the night before, still half hidden among the shadows, not moving closer, not running away, just watching. Benjamin's pulse raced, but the fear was softer now, dulled by curiosity. He raised his lantern, but this time he didn't speak. The light flickered against her face, revealing a stillness so human that it hurt to look at. Then, as quietly as she had come, she turned and vanished into the trees. That night, Benjamin sat by his kitchen table, hands clasped tight. Scout, his old dog, rested by the fire. "She's not like the stories," he murmured. "There's something else." The dog lifted its head as if listening. The next day, Benjamin walked to the garden behind his cabin. From an old crate, he filled a basket with apples, carrots, and the last of the cornbread. He hesitated only a moment before placing it on the tree stump near the clearing, the very spot where her eyes had glimmered through the mist. He felt foolish, a man his age leaving food for something out of a campfire legend. But that night, sleep came easier, and when morning arrived, the basket was empty. No signs of struggle, no paw prints or claw marks, just a few small stones neatly arranged in a circle, deliberate, careful, as if someone had meant it as a response. Benjamin stood there for a long time, staring at the stones. The air felt different, alive, somehow aware. He knelt, tracing his finger over the cold rock. A laugh, quiet and disbelieving, slipped from his throat. Well, I'll be damned. For the first time in years, his heart stirred with something close to joy. That evening, he left another basket. And again by sunrise, it was gone, replaced by a twig bent and tied into a loop. Days passed, each one blending into the next. Every night she came closer, never into the clearing, but always near enough that he could see the faint shimmer of her fur in the moonlight. Sometimes she lingered long enough for him to whisper, "You don't have to be afraid." But she never answered, never approached. It was a strange, silent understanding, two lives circling each other like shadows drawn by the same fire. The forest began to change for Benjamin. It no longer felt empty. He found himself listening for her, looking for signs, broken branches, faint footprints, the shape of her presence against the fog. Each night she came, the loneliness inside him thinned, replaced by a quiet companionship that words could never touch. One evening, as he set down the basket, he paused. His reflection glimmered faintly in a puddle near the stump, and beside it another, larger, darker outline. He turned his head slowly. There she was, standing closer than ever before, her shape framed by the pale light of the moon. Her breathing was heavy, visible in the cool night air. Benjamin didn't move. Neither did she. For a long, fragile moment, they simply looked at each other. In her eyes he saw not wildness, but exhaustion, longing, and something heartbreakingly human. He lifted his hand slowly, palm open. "I'm not your enemy," he said softly. Her gaze followed his movement, wary but calm. Then she turned away, disappearing into the trees once more. When he returned inside, Benjamin sat in silence by the fire. The warmth of the flames brushed his weathered face, and he realized something strange. He was smiling. It wasn't the grin of amusement or disbelief, but of connection. "She's got someone waiting," he whispered to Scout. "Maybe she knows I did too." Once. The dog sighed, curling closer to the hearth. For the first time since his wife's passing, Benjamin felt the ache of solitude begin to soften, not gone, but gentler. The presence of that strange, gentle giantess out there among the pines had reminded him of something long forgotten, empathy shared without a single word. As the night deepened, the forest hummed softly beyond his walls. Benjamin closed his eyes and thought of her, the woman in the shadows, carrying life through a world that didn't understand her. And somewhere out there among the whispering trees, a mother watched over him, too silent, patient, thankful. Part 2. The Night of Fear. The night came early, thick and heavy. Clouds rolled over the Oregon hills like dark waves swallowing the moonlight. Benjamin sat by the window with his lantern dimmed, the old wood stove crackling quietly. Scout, his aging hound, lay asleep at his feet. The air felt wrong, too still, too heavy. He'd lived alone long enough to sense, when the forest held its breath, that strange, suffocating silence that came before something happened. Outside, the wind shifted. The trees groaned softly, then went still again. Then came the sound. 3 knocks, slow, deliberate, wood against wood. Knock, knock, knock. Benjamin froze. His eyes darted to the door. Scout raised his head and growled low, the fur along his spine standing up. No one ever came this far. No one ever knocked. For a moment he thought he imagined it. But then again, knock, knock, knock. He stood, the floorboards creaking beneath his boots. His heart pounded against his ribs. He reached for the shotgun that hung by the door, not out of aggression, but habit. Decades of ranch life had taught him that caution kept you alive. "Easy, Scout," he whispered. The dog whimpered, ears flat. Benjamin took a slow breath, placed his hand on the latch, and opened the door. The storm had not yet broken, but the air smelled of rain and soil. And there, barely 10 feet away, she stood, the pregnant Bigfoot. Her massive frame loomed against the tree line, but it wasn't her size that struck him. It was her trembling. Her chest heaved with uneven breaths. The wet fur along her shoulders shimmered under the lantern light. Benjamin didn't move. Neither did she. Her eyes, those deep human eyes, locked on him, full of panic and something worse, fear. Not of him, of something else. Her head jerked toward the woods behind her, and she let out a sound, low, guttural trembling. Not a roar, not a threat. It was a warning. Benjamin stepped out onto the porch, lantern raised. "What is it?" he whispered, though he knew she couldn't answer. The Bigfoot turned sharply toward the trees again, shoulders tensing, body angled as if ready to run or fight. Then she looked back at him one last time, a glance filled with something almost pleading, before she vanished into the dark. Branches cracked, leaves rustled, and then silence. Benjamin stood there for several minutes, staring into the void where she had disappeared. His breath came out in short, fogged bursts. The smell of damp earth and pine resin hung thick in the air. He could still feel it, the vibration of her steps fading into the ground beneath him. "Damn," he muttered, lowering the lantern. What was that? Inside, Scout whined, pacing in circles near the door. Benjamin knelt beside him, resting a trembling hand on his head. "It's all right, boy," he said, though his voice shook. "It's all right." But it wasn't. The rest of the night crawled by in uneasy silence. He kept the fire high and the lantern burning. Every creak of the old cabin made him flinch. Once he thought he heard movement, distant, heavy, slow, circling just beyond the light's edge. He sat there with the shotgun resting across his knees, waiting, but nothing came. By dawn, the forest was quiet again. Too quiet. Benjamin stepped outside. The air was thick with fog, the ground soft beneath his boots. He followed a trail of heavy footprints leading away from the cabin, her footprints. Halfway down the trail, they stopped. The earth beyond was disturbed, clawed, as if something massive had moved through, but no tracks followed hers, no sign of what she'd feared. Still, he felt it, a presence. Something had watched them last night. He knelt by the last footprint and pressed his palm into it. The print was almost twice the size of his hand, the edges still sharp from the night's damp air. "She's not the only one out here," he murmured. He thought about her face, the way her eyes had darted toward the darkness, the silent message in them. Fear, yes, but also trust. She had come to him not to hurt, but to warn. That realization hit him harder than any knock on his door. She had been alone out there, a mother-to-be in a world that hunted what it didn't understand. And somehow in her moment of panic, she had turned to him. To him, the man who hadn't spoken to another soul in months. Benjamin felt his throat tighten. "I see you, ma'am," he whispered into the trees. "I hear you." A faint breeze stirred through the pines, carrying the scent of rain and earth. For a moment he thought he saw movement, just a shadow slipping between the trunks. But it was gone before he could be sure. He stood there for a long while before turning back toward the cabin. The world felt heavier now, not dangerous exactly, but charged with something vast and unseen. That night he sat by the window again, lantern dim, staring into the dark beyond the porch. He knew she might not come back, but he also knew deep down that somewhere out there she was running not from him, but from something far worse. And though he didn't understand why, Benjamin felt a fierce, aching need to keep her safe. Because in that brief moment on the porch, when two sets of frightened eyes met through the rain, he had seen more of himself in that creature than he had in any human for years. Part 3. The Scream Through the Pines. The days passed in uneasy silence. Each morning, Benjamin stepped out onto his porch, eyes scanning the same tree line where she had always stood. But the shadows never moved. The forest, once alive with whispers and small signs of her presence, a broken branch, a footprint in the mud, had gone dead. The woods weren't quiet. They were empty, and that, Benjamin knew, was worse. Scout whined at the edge of the porch, sniffing the airtail low. Even the old dog could sense the change. "She's gone," Benjamin murmured. Or, "Something's keeping her away." For the next few days he left the baskets as he always did, apples, roots, corn, bits of jerky. Each morning they sat untouched. Even the birds stayed away. By the 7th day, the unease inside him turned to something sharper, dread. The forest wasn't just quiet anymore. It was watching. He could feel it. That afternoon, as clouds gathered low and gray, Benjamin packed his lantern rifle and a small pack of food. "Come on, Scout," he said softly. Let's find her. The hound hesitated, then followed paws crunching over dry pine needles as they entered the woods. The air was thick, heavy with the smell of rain. The deeper they went, the darker it grew. The forest canopy pressed close, muffling every sound. No birds, no wind, just the rhythmic crunch of his boots and the pounding of his heart. For hours he followed old trails, the same routes she had once taken, marked faintly by broken twigs and trampled earth. But there were no fresh signs, no prints, no scent, only the feeling that something was wrong. When dusk fell, Benjamin stopped to rest. He wiped the sweat from his brow, squinting through the mist. That's when he heard it, a sound so sudden, so raw that it froze the blood in his veins. A scream. It tore through the forest, deep, guttural, and long, shaking the air itself. It wasn't human, but it wasn't animal either. It was something caught between a voice full of pain, of fear, of loss. Scout barked once, then whimpered, pressing against Benjamin's leg. Benjamin's breath hitched. "Dear God," he whispered. He started running. Branches slapped against his coat roots, tore at his boots. The scream came again, closer this time, then stopped. Silence. The only sound was his heartbeat and the distant drip of melting snow. Then he saw it. A wide clearing opened before him where several pine trees had been snapped clean in half, as if struck by something massive. The snow beneath was disturbed, churned, splattered, stained. A dark patch stretched across the white. Blood. Benjamin dropped to his knees. The metallic scent hit him hard. He reached out his trembling fingers, brushing the frozen stain. "Jesus," he breathed. Beside the blood was a shattered branch, its bark stripped away, and a trail of deep impressions leading into the brush. Footprints huge, far larger than hers. Each one sank deep into the snow, spaced wide apart, heavy with power. Benjamin traced the outline of one with his gloved hand. It was twice the size of the prints he'd seen before. Whatever made it wasn't just another Bigfoot. It was something bigger, and it had found her. He swallowed hard, his throat burning. "She was running," he muttered. "She was running from this." The forest seemed to lean in around him as if listening. The branches whispered softly in the wind, but offered no comfort. Scout whined behind him, pawing at the ground, uneasy. Benjamin stared at the blood for a long time, the ache in his chest growing heavier by the second. He thought of her standing outside his cabin that night, her trembling, her eyes darting toward the woods, her warning growl. She hadn't been afraid for herself. She had been afraid for her child. The realization struck him like a knife. His vision blurred. He didn't know if it was from the cold or from tears. He pressed his palm against the blood-soaked snow. "You didn't deserve this," he whispered. His voice broke. "Not you. Not after everything." The wind howled, suddenly carrying the faint scent of iron and earth. It sounded almost like a voice, low and mournful, weaving through the pines. Benjamin rose slowly, the weight of grief anchoring his body. He turned his gaze toward the horizon where the forest stretched endlessly into the mist. She had come to him in trust, and now she was gone, taken by something crueler than nature itself. But deep down, a flicker of defiance kindled in his chest. He wouldn't let her be forgotten. He knelt once more, drawing a small cross into the snow beside the bloodstain, pressing his hand over it in quiet prayer. "Rest easy, ma'am," he said softly. "You're safe now, wherever you are." Then he turned, rifle slung over his shoulder, and began the long walk home. As he walked, the forest behind him grew darker, swallowing the clearing, erasing the evidence of what had been. But the echo of that scream, that inhuman cry of pain, followed him all the way back to his cabin. That night he sat in his chair by the window, the Firelo Scout asleep at his feet. He stared at the darkness beyond the porch, waiting, listening. But the forest didn't move. It only remembered. And for the first time in years, Benjamin felt the ache of true loss, not of a woman, not of a wife, but of a friend, born from the same loneliness that haunted him. Part 4. The Gift of Stone. The seasons began to turn. The sharp bite of summer storms gave way to the still breath of early autumn. The leaves had not yet changed, but the air carried that faint chill that hinted at endings. Benjamin moved slower these days. His joints ached. His hair had thinned, and his world had grown smaller, limited to the distance between his porch and the edge of the woods. It had been weeks since he'd gone searching for her. Weeks since that awful scream. And though he tried to tell himself she was gone, that whatever had happened in those dark trees was over his heart, refused to let go. Every night he'd find himself sitting on that same porch, lantern dimmed, staring into the forest. The silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It pressed down on him like a memory too heavy to bear. Sometimes he thought he saw movement, a shadow sliding between trunks, the flick of a branch where there shouldn't be wind, but it always vanished before he could be sure. Then came that night. It was early October, and the world was wrapped in gold mist. Benjamin was stacking firewood along the porch when a sound broke through the quiet. Knock, knock, knock. He froze. 3 gentle taps. Not loud, not threatening, but familiar. The same rhythm he'd heard months ago, the same one that had once brought her to his door. His heart skipped a beat. He turned toward the woods, breath fogging in the cool air. "Hello," he called softly. Nothing answered. Only the slow rustle of the trees. Benjamin lifted the lantern and stepped off the porch. Scout whimpered from behind, unwilling to follow. The light swayed as he moved through the damp grass toward the clearing where he used to leave the baskets. The stump stood there, slick with dew, pale under the moonlight. At first he saw nothing unusual, just the empty wood and the faint shimmer of mist rising from the earth. Then the light caught something. A small, round stone. It was smooth, almost polished, and placed dead center on the stump, not dropped, not random, but set there with intention. Beside it, tangled against the bark, was a single strand of coarse black hair. Benjamin's breath hitched. His knees nearly buckled. He reached out, fingers trembling as he picked up the stone. It was cold to the touch, heavier than it looked. "No," he whispered. "It can't be." He turned the lantern higher, scanning the tree line, half hoping, half afraid he might see her standing there again. But there was nothing, only darkness. Still the proof sat warm in his palm. She was alive. Somehow impossibly she had survived. Benjamin sank to his knees beside the stump, lantern light flickering across his lined face. His vision blurred with tears he hadn't realized were coming. "You made it," he murmured. "You made it, didn't you?" The forest answered only with silence, the kind that felt like understanding. He placed his other hand over his heart and laughed softly, a sound roughened by disbelief and relief. The single hair beside the stone glistened in the light, long, black, unmistakable. He gathered it carefully and wrapped it in a piece of cloth from his pocket. It wasn't much, but it was proof not just of survival, but of memory. She hadn't forgotten. All this time he'd thought their strange bond had ended in blood and tragedy. But no. She had remembered the man who once left her food and watched over her when the world turned cruel. And now she was saying, "Thank you," in the only way she could. Benjamin stayed there for a long time, staring at the stump, feeling the quiet hum of life return to the forest around him. The air seemed warmer, lighter, alive once more. He looked toward the tree line one last time, speaking softly into the wind. "I'll take care of it. The light, the food, it'll be here, for as long as I am." The leaves rustled gently in reply, and for a moment, just for a heartbeat, he thought he heard it, a low, familiar rumble in the distance, soft and calm like a mother's sigh. When he returned to the cabin, he set the stone on his mantel beside his wife's photograph. "Guess I'm not the only one who leaves gifts anymore," he said with a weary smile. Scout lifted his head tail, thumping once, then settled again. The fire crackled warm and steady. Benjamin sat in his chair and let his eyes fall shut. For the first time in months, his mind wasn't haunted by screams or silence, only by the sound of that soft knock, 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 echoing like a heartbeat through the pines. He smiled faintly. She was alive. And she remembered. Part 5. The Knock in the Night. Years slipped quietly through Benjamin's life like wind through pine needles. The cabin aged with him, its roof sagging, its porch creaking, its walls now heavy with silence. Scout had long since passed. The garden had grown wild, half reclaimed by the forest. Yet every evening, Benjamin still lit a lantern on the porch, the same way he had for years, a small, steady flame against the darkness. His hair was silver now, his hands trembled as he moved, but his eyes still carried that gentle fire, the fire of a man who had seen both the cruelty and the kindness of the wilderness. He no longer searched the woods. He didn't have to. The forest had its own way of reminding him. Some nights when the moon hung low and pale, the world would go utterly still, the kind of stillness that pressed softly against the heart. And then it would come. Knock, knock, knock. 3 soft taps on the porch wall. Always the same rhythm, always gentle. Always from the same place right beside the door where she had once stood all those years ago. The first time it happened, Benjamin froze in his chair. His old hands gripped the arms of the seat, his heart stumbling in his chest. But then he smiled, slow, tender, knowing. He didn't need to open the door. He didn't need to see her. He just leaned back, eyes half closed, and whispered into the quiet, "Good night, my friend." The air seemed to shift in response, a faint stir, a sigh through the pine branches, and then silence again. It became a pattern, though not one bound by time. Sometimes the knocks came weeks apart, sometimes months, but they always came when he needed them most, on nights when his bones ached too much to sleep, or when the loneliness crept in like frost through the window cracks. Each time he would whisper the same words, his voice soft and steady. "You're still out there, aren't you?" He liked to imagine her now, older, stronger. Her child grown, roaming freely through the mountains she had once feared. Maybe she came alone, maybe with others. Maybe the forest itself sent the echo carrying her memory through the years. It didn't matter. What mattered was that she remembered. And in her own quiet way, she still came back. One evening, the sky burned orange with sunset, and Benjamin sat outside watching the last light fade between the trees. The lantern flickered beside him, and he reached out, touching the cool metal. He thought of that night long ago, the first time he'd seen her standing there, huge and trembling eyes, full of fear and life. He thought of the basket of apples, the gift of the stone, the scream through the pines. All of it felt distant now, like something from another lifetime. But one truth remained clear. She had taught him something no war, no man ever could. That kindness once given never disappears. It just finds new ways to come back. The wind rustled softly, and a single pine cone rolled across the porch. He smiled at that, shaking his head. "Still playing tricks on me, huh?" he muttered. Then knock, knock, knock. This time the sound was faint, almost hesitant. Benjamin didn't move. He didn't even turn his head. He simply closed his eyes, the hint of a smile curling at his lips. "Good night," he said quietly, voice trembling but warm. "Good night, my friend." The forest seemed to breathe in unison, a slow exhale that carried through the branches and across the land. When the morning came, the porch was empty, but on the railing sat a single pine cone placed carefully beside the lantern. Benjamin chuckled when he saw it. "I knew you'd come by." He picked it up, placed it next to the smooth stone on his mantel, and stood for a long while looking at them both, small, simple things, but more meaningful than any treasure. Outside, the forest swayed with the wind. The world was quiet, but not empty. He wasn't alone anymore. Not really. The sun sank low behind the Oregon Ridge, spilling gold over the trees. Benjamin sat quietly on the porch, his blanket drawn over his knees. The air was cool, the kind of cold that hinted winter was near. Beside him, as always, sat a small basket of fruit, a folded blanket, and a lantern burning low. His yearly ritual. His way of remembering. His voice came softly steady as the wind. "Every fall before the first frost, I leave a blanket, a bucket of water, and a light for a friend." The forest listened, still and endless. Then, from far beyond the tree line, knock, knock, knock. Benjamin didn't turn his head. He just smiled. "Welcome home," he whispered. The lantern flickered, its flame reflected in his eyes, warm, steady, alive. Because in this wild land where loneliness echoes louder than the wind, kindness remains the only fire that never dies. Bigfoot was never the monster, only the reflection of our own humanity. If this story touched your heart, leave a little fire emoji in the comments so we'll know the kindness in you is still burning. This is Rancher Wild West Stories, where Western cinema legend and healing meet, where every lonely night in the West hides a story that might save a soul.